Thank you, Swami Yajnadharanandaji, for this very generous introduction that you gave. I'm very happy to be in Jammu this time, virtually. I was there more than 50 years ago as a high school student, and we had our school trip, which had gone to Jammu and Srinagar. And while I haven't been to Kashmir after that time, at least now technology has made it possible that I can go at least virtually. And of course, I know that among those of you who are participating in this function virtually also are not only those from Jammu, but also in other parts of the world. It's a happy coincidence that today I get to reflect a little bit on Swami Vivekananda's life, while also being cognizant of the fact that this is the 75th year of after independence. And so Bharat ki Azadi, and so it's nice to be able to reflect on not only how Swamiji saw India, but also how India saw Swamiji then and how India sees Swamiji now. Speaking about the 75 years of Indian independence, we cannot but remember the immense sacrifices that have gone. Those of us who are born after Indian independence have born into a free India. And while we may have read a little about it in our history books, it's always a great blessing, a great honor to remember the sacrifices of innumerable of our earlier generation Indians who gave up their life. Subhash Chandra Bose, the great revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh, Sardar Bhagat Singh, so many names come to mind. But in addition to all these great ones who laid down their life, who sacrificed everything for Indian independence, we also have to acknowledge that there were hundreds and thousands of other Indians who, in their own little way, tried to help the moving India towards freedom. So while we may remember only a handful of names, those names which come in history, it's also a good practice to remember the innumerable unknown Indians who helped in making India free, but also those others after India became free, how they have worked hard and continue to work hard to bring India closer and closer to the ideal that India represents. Because even as we think about 75 years of Indian independence, we should remember that India is much, much older than that. So this 75 years is of India as a nation, as a political entity, a one big political entity encompassing almost the entire Indian subcontinent. But India existed clearly, as we all know, for centuries before that. And so even as we celebrate the victories, the advances of India as a nation, we must also remember that old India, the India that was always at a different level, at the spiritual level, always very free. From the Indian perspective, we like to see Swamiji as a patriot saint. In fact, for every devotee and student of Swami Vivekananda's life, at some point or other, we ask ourselves the question, who was Swami Vivekananda? And this question can come even after we have read all of his life. even after we have heard many lectures, even after we have reflected a lot. But still, at some point, we have to pause and say, who was he really? The moment we try to pigeonhole Swamiji into one category, one label, we suddenly find, no, he's something else, and so on. So one of the labels that has kind of stuck on Swamiji is as a patriot saint. In fact, I think his brother, Bhupendranath Datta, wrote a book which is titled Vivekananda, a Patriot Saint. I believe that's the title of the book. So it's helpful to reflect on Swamiji's patriotism and Swamiji's sainthood. Putting that together, we will try to figure out what does being a patriot saint means. Now, Swamiji's love for India is well known. As before me, Om Prakash ji very eloquently pointed out how much love Swamiji had for India, and through many different incidents. Once during an interview, Swamiji was asked what, according to him, was the purpose of his movement regarding India. And these are Swamiji's words. Swamiji said, to find the common basis of Hinduism and awaken the national consciousness to them. And again, we find in Swamiji's lectures how he keeps on hammering at this idea that religion is the backbone of India, that spirituality is the backbone of India. And when we read that, one of the ways of translating that statement in our own understanding is, for me to be a true Indian, I have to ask myself, is spirituality the backbone of my own life? Because if spirituality and religion are the backbone of India, then it stands to reason that spirituality and religion must be the backbone of every person who claims to be an Indian. So that's one of the points of reflection we can keep in mind. But Swamiji, one important point to be kept in mind here is this, that Swamiji's love for India, there was no politics involved there. A lot of our thinking, a lot of our kind of self-congratulatory behavior, a lot of our patriotism is kind of wound up into India as a political entity. And we have to guard ourselves against that. Swamiji once wrote to his disciple in Madras, Alasinga Perumal, and this is what Swamiji said. One thing I find in the books of my speeches and sayings published in Calcutta, some of them are printed in such a way as to savor of political views, whereas I am no politician or political agitator. I care only for the spirit. When that is right, everything will be righted by itself. On another occasion, Swamiji wrote to Alasinga, I do not believe in politics. God and truth are the only politics in the world. Everything else is trash. That's very powerful words. When a journalist asked Swamiji in London whether he had given any attention to the Indian National Congress, which had been founded, I believe, in 1885, and Swamiji said, I cannot claim to have given much. My work is in another part of the field. So when we think of Swamiji as a patriot, we have to be very careful, because Swamiji's patriotism was of a very different kind. His patriotism was really an expression of what we might call in Sanskrit, Deshatma Bodha. Atma Bodha is awareness of the self. Now, all of us have awareness of the self. Now, most of the time, our self may be identified with the body and mind. But Deshatma Bodha means that my self expands and becomes identified with the whole Desha, with the whole of India. And that is how Swamiji saw himself, that identifying his consciousness with this big entity called Bharat. So he often described himself as condensed India. For Swamiji, India represented a repository of spiritual values, of spiritual principles, which he said often and often would nourish the entire world. So working to make India better, working to make India stronger is not with the idea to kind of make it like more better than other countries, not in competition with the other parts of the world. Although that kind of a Zingoism can sometimes come into our thinking that we are better, we are superior. And part of it is also because of the colonial effect. Sometimes they say, when the British left India in 1947, we feel we are no longer a colony of the British. That's true. Geographically, they had left the place. But there is such a thing as a colonization of the mind. And so that takes a much longer time. So a political freedom is one thing. But have we become free from that mentality, that way of thinking? And that is something we have to be very cognizant of. And sometimes we might see and believe ourselves as thinking, because that's what we were told for at least 300 years before the British left, that we are somehow inferior. We are somehow not up to the world standard. And that kind of a complex can enter into the collective subconscious. And a way to react against that kind of a branding that you are not up to the standard is to then kind of lash out and say, no, we are better than everybody. And so sometimes we see in the Indian way of thinking, we just want to show we are superior to everyone in everything. We are like the best. Now, I can understand the value of that for having a good, strong self-esteem. But all right-thinking men and women recognize that there are certain things in which we are very good. We can be proud of it. And that, as Swami Vivekananda pointed out, was first and foremost our spirituality, the great heritage that we are born with. But there are also a lot of other things we can learn from other people, from outside India, from other parts of the world. So a progressive attitude would be to share the things that we have, the things that we can rightly be proud of, that here is this great treasure, the great legacy that we have, and we want to share it with everyone. And in return, we will learn from other things, from many other things that the world has to teach us. And that is what Swamiji wanted. That was how he saw the relationship between India and the rest of the world. And therefore, welfare of India, working hard to make our country a good country, a better and better place, was a very sacred task. Because if when India remains strong, what it has to share for the rest of the world becomes easy then to share it with them. That is why Swamiji said, now the very dust of India has become very holy to me. The very air is now to me holy. It is now the holy land, the place of pilgrimage, the Tirtha. Again, here is another point of reflection that those of us who identify as Indians can say, that I can be an Indian in the truest sense of the term, when like Swamiji, I can say that the very dust has become holy to me, that the very air to me is holy. So these are things that we need to reflect on. Now, in addition to Swamiji's patriotism, we said Swamiji is seen as a patriot saint. What about Swamiji as a saint? And we have already seen from much that has been said about Swamiji in the earlier talk, how Swamiji was a saint, but a saint of a very different type. The kind of saint in recent history, in the last 200 years, India hadn't seen much. It was very unconventional in many ways, as those of us who have read Swamiji's life know. In Madras, Swamiji used to wrestle with some of the youngsters who came to him. Swamiji was very well built, he had a great physique, and therefore he acquired the name Pahalwan Swami, the wrestler monk. In Belgaum, or I think now it's called Belgavi, when Swamiji was visiting that great place, he once asked the hosts for betel leaves, this pan and tobacco. And they were shocked. A holy man, a sannyasi, wanting to eat pan and wanting tobacco. And then Swamiji explained to them that he had these habits before he came to Ramakrishna, before he took up spiritual life. And after he started leading a spiritual life, after this great spiritual transformation that occurred to him as a result of the grace of his guru, he let these things remain as of no great consequence, not out of an addiction to them, but it was something that could remain without affecting his spirituality. About eating food, sometimes we know saintly figures are very finicky about food. And when Swamiji was asked whether you can eat food from non-Hindus. And remember, this today it might not seem like a big deal, but more than 100 years ago, when the orthodoxy was still very strong in the India of those days, it was unthinkable that especially a sannyasi, a sadhu, would eat food from anywhere and everywhere. And Swamiji said, yes, I've eaten food from anyone. During his wandering days, as we heard about earlier, he did not make any distinction between this person or that person. Now, these were all very unconventional, unorthodox habits that Swamiji had. The reason was Swamiji's sainthood had transcended the barriers of caste, religion, and race. As he himself once said, he had touched the very feet of God. He was the child of God, pure and simple, and people could not but love Swamiji. So Swamiji's patriotism and his love for the nation and his sainthood, they were all of a very special kind. One question that can often come is this, because even as we reflect on Swamiji's connection with India, which is the focus of today's meeting, we have also to remember that Swamiji had a role beyond this geographical entity of India. In fact, many of Swamiji's Western disciples often refer to him privately in their correspondence as the prophet. Swamiji wrote once, he said, "You must not forget that my interests are international and not Indian alone." Because there was an effort when Swamiji came to the Parliament of Religions, as we all know, and he stayed on this country for next 4 years almost. And some people in India had then started becoming a little uneasy. And so someone wrote to him, "When are you returning to India? This is your field of action." And Swamiji just lashed out back. He was a free monk, he was Azad. And he said, "Who is anyone to lay any claim on me? I belong to the whole world." That's why Swamiji wrote in 1895, "As for me, mind you, I stand at nobody's dictation. I know my mission in life and no chauvinism about me. I belong as much to India as to the world, no humbug about that." And this is important. What country has any special claim on me? Am I any nation's slave? So here's this kind of an amazing combination of someone who loves India dearly, who describes himself as condensed India, who says that the very dust of India is holy to me, the very air is very sacred. And the same person then can say, my interests are not Indian alone, that I'm nobody's slave. How can these two apparently contradictory approaches live together, stay together? And the answer to that is, what was Swamiji's idea of India? What was India? And it seems to me that rather than seeing India as a geographical entity, mostly right from ranging from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, and from the east to the west, from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal, that's a kind of a geographical way we might describe the subcontinent. But Swamiji did not see India as merely this beautiful land of mountains, rivers, and great people and excellent everything, really. To India, to an Indian, all of these things are of great, great value and great love. But Swamiji's idea of India was not limited by space. He saw India as an idea, as an ideal that must be lived and that must be practiced in our hearts. So to call ourselves Indian, it's not enough to just have Indian parents or be born in India or have some ancestral connection in India. No, that or carry an Indian passport or have an Aadhaar card. No, I don't think, I think being an Indian is a much more deeper identity. The kind of, for instance, we speak about, Swamiji spoke about the value of spirituality. Is that spirituality a prime concern in my own mind? Swamiji spoke about a moral life, leading according to dharma. Is that a primary concern of my life? Whether we may like it or not, in the corruption index, India is still quite high. And so even as we rightfully are proud of our Vedic heritage, we speak glowingly about the rishis and the munis and the Upanishads and the Gita. And we look at India of today. Yes, there are some amazing, wonderful things happening in India, no doubt about it, and we can be very proud of that. But also, there is also a lot of corruption, more corruption in compared to some other countries in the world, some other parts of the world, which sometimes Indians will look down upon as materialistic places. And so we have to have this kind of an introspection to ask ourselves, if we are so spiritual, why is there so much corruption? If we see the living Shakti, the divine mother, that's what our ideal asks us to see in every woman. Why is the condition of women so bad? Why is it that in some cities, women cannot venture out alone after dark? These are the kind of questions we have to ask. So in order to be Indian in the truest sense of the term, we have to ask ourselves, am I actually living these ideals in my heart? That is a very important thing. Swamiji, when he wanted to start this magazine, which today most of you are aware of, it's called Prabuddha Bharat. So the name Swamiji chose, Prabuddha Bharat, really means awakened India. Prabuddha, Buddha is awake, and Prabuddha means awake in a very powerful way. So what does it mean? In what way was India asleep that it's now awakened? And then we might still ask, has it awakened fully yet? I remember more than 45 years ago, I asked this question to Swami Ranganathanandaji Maharaj, sometime in mid 70s, and I was very young then, and so I asked Maharaj this question. I said, we read in Swamiji's lectures, even in lectures in Kolomatolmora, where Swamiji says, the darkest night seems to be going away, the dawn is breaking, great days are ahead, and so on. And I said, those are the words Swamiji had spoken more than 70 years earlier when I asked this question. And so 70 years had passed since then. And so I very naively, the kind of a thing a teenager might ask, I asked him that question and said, how far have we realized Swamiji's dream? How much has that darkness really gone? How much high above the horizon the sun has risen? And Maharaj became a little thoughtful. And after about a gap of 30 seconds or almost a minute, he said, we have a long way to go. And that was something that I have never forgotten. That even while we feel encouraged, inspired by the glowing words that Swamiji spoke about India, we just also must be very humble that we are still a long way to go. That these ideals are present, but the people must be there to live those ideas. If we want to make Swamiji happy, I somehow feel, to the extent I'm able to not just appreciate these great Indian principles as embodied in these different fields, especially spirituality, but also make an effort to live according to them. The more these ideals live in me, then only I can say I have truly become an Indian. And then, and this is important, and then the real India will be revealed to me. So I'll conclude with just one observation. Sometimes we hear, and it's a very strong, dearly held belief in India, that dying in Kashi, dying in Benares, we will be liberated. Sri Ramakrishna, we know, had a vision where everyone who dies in Benares, the body is brought, washed in the Ganga at the Manikarnika Ghat. And Sri Ramakrishna had this mystical vision that the Divine Mother is cutting these bonds, snapping these bondage, and Shiva himself is giving the Taraka Brahma mantra in every departed soul. It's a very powerful vision. And it's also in Kashi Khanda, it is mentioned that anyone who dies in Kashi, anyone who dies in Benares will get moksha. Now, it's, of course, it feels good to feel that, but also the skeptical mind, the logical mind asks, how is that even possible? Even philosophically, Kashi is just one place, looking at it as a very neutral observer, one place on this planet. What makes such a big difference? Just dying there, you're liberated, and dying someplace else, you're not. Whether or not you're fit for it. What if a person who is not led a moral life, not led in a spiritual life, has hurt people, has done terrible things? If such a person dies there, will that person be liberated also? Somehow, that idea never made sense to me, and I didn't say of it too often because that would be very heretical in the eyes of many people. But then this idea came to me, and it was this, that which is the real Kashi? Yes, when we go to Benares, and many of us who are at this program today have been there, we do feel uplifted. We just feel it's a holy, sacred place, no doubt about it. And the more or the greater the sensitivity we have, the more uplifted we feel. Very true. But yet, even then, am I really seeing the real Kashi? In spite of the great upliftment and the visits to the temples and everything, am I really seeing the real Kashi? What is the real Kashi? And then we remember the vision that Sri Ramakrishna had. We read in the great master, Leela Prasanga, written by Swami Sharadanandaji, how when Sri Ramakrishna visited Banaras, how as his boat neared the city, he saw a Swarnamayi Nagari, a city of gold. Now, he was actually describing what he saw. It was not a very poetic statement. It's not just a kind of a metaphorical statement. Sri Ramakrishna actually saw Banaras as the city of gold. That was what he saw in a mystical vision. And I would say that is the real Kashi. Now, if I have a vision of that Kashi and I die, of course I'm going to be liberated, because I will not have a vision of that Kashi unless my heart has become completely pure. If my heart hasn't become completely pure yet, I might feel uplifted to the extent of whatever purity I have acquired, but I'm also going to see an ancient city filled with dust, crowded, and all of that. So, just as the real Kashi, the golden city, is different from the Kashi that we see when we just go there. The real India, the kind of India that Swamiji described, is different from merely visiting India or being born there. The real India is an India whose backbone is spirituality. The real India is the India who breeds dharma. And therefore, if I have to see that real India, spirituality must become the backbone of my own life. That doesn't mean I don't have to do any other thing. Of course not. We just don't have a backbone. Besides the backbone, we have hands, feet, we have so many other things. But all of these other activities I'm able to do well if my backbone is in the right place. It's doing what it needs to do. So spirituality is like that. Of course, we are making great advances in science and technology. In space technology, India is among the very top in the world today. In many, many fields, we are amazing, and we can be rightly be proud of that. But all of that will make sense if our backbone is in the right place. And our backbone, as Swamiji said, is spirituality and religion. And to the extent we hold on to that and never forget that, only then can we say we are true Indians. Only then can we say, I'm really seeing the real India before me. And what does being spiritual mean? What does it mean to live according to dharma? And among the many other things that involves, first thing is love. Swamiji said, patience, purity, perseverance, and above all, love. And love means absence of hatred. So long as I have even the least bit of hatred, anger, suspicion against any other person, my love hasn't become full yet. I cannot say I love India and then say I have hatred for some of these people who live in India. That just doesn't work. If I love, that love must be unconditional. If I have to reflect the glory of the divine in my heart, just like God's love is unconditional, my love must be unconditional also. We have had great victories using our military power. We have great victories using our economic power. But it's only through love that we can conquer anything and everything. And the conquest through love doesn't lead to bloodshed, doesn't lead to fights, doesn't lead to all the negativities we see all around us. So even as we celebrate now Swamiji's life, Swamiji's teachings, the Swamiji's aspect as a patriot, as a saint, Swamiji's relationship with India, we have got to hold in our heart all these ideas and ask ourselves these questions. What does India mean? Am I a true Indian? And so on. So on this day, my prayer to Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji, that through their infinite grace, may the real India be revealed to us in our heart, so that we can live according to those ideals. We can practice those ideals in our life and make our lives truly blessed. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om.